I was never one to believe in creepy outdoors stories. I'm not superstitious, and I've worked as a backcountry park ranger for nearly a decade without ever seeing anything I couldn't explain. You spend enough time in the wilderness, you get used to weird sounds, strange silhouettes, even the occasional person doing something stupid deep in the woods. But there's one part of the trail system in the national park where I work that I always avoided. Not because of anything I saw, but because of something I didn't. A path that wasn't supposed to exist, and yet it always found its way back. I was stationed at High Pines, a region of thick forest tucked into the northern range, not far from a forgotten fire tower that's been out of use since the 70s. My job was mostly to check on hikers, maintain trail markers, and radio in any changes in trail conditions. A solo job, and I liked it that way. This happened in late October, leaves turning brown, the woods turning quiet. The tourists were mostly gone, save for the occasional hardcore backpacker trying to squeeze in one last multi-day loop before the snow hit. On the third day of my 5-day patrol, I woke to find something odd, a new trail marker, red paint on the bark of an old birch tree. Fresh. I hadn't placed it. No one else was scheduled to be in my section of the woods. I checked my map. No trail existed where that marker pointed. It led directly into a part of the forest so dense it looked like a wall of shadows even under the midday sun. At first, I thought maybe it was a prank, some local trying to mess with hikers. I followed it for about 50 yards before stopping. Every 15 feet or so, another red mark appeared, always on trees that looked older than any I'd seen in the park before. There was no trail to speak of, just the marks and the silence. I turned back. That night, I radioed it in, but there was no response. My ranger station issued satellite radios, but coverage was spotty at best in this section. I marked it in my log and tried to sleep. That's when I heard it. Voices, not screams, not whispers, just people talking, like a group of hikers chatting casually. Only there weren't any campsites near me, and the voices weren't coming from the trail. They were coming from the direction of the red-marked trees. Now I've heard true horror stories from other rangers. Campers going missing, shadows in fire towers, whole groups walking into the woods and never coming back. Most of them are probably just that, stories, but this felt different. I couldn't shake it. By the next morning, the forest felt wrong. Still cold, too still. Even the birds were quiet. I packed up and followed the red marks again, intending to remove or cover them. But something had changed. The trees were closer, the space between them tighter, darker, as if the forest had leaned in overnight. There was still no path, but the red marks had multiplied. Every tree, every branch, some of them freshly painted. Then I found the boot, half buried in leaves, old, worn, and covered in moss. I dug it out, thinking maybe it belonged to a lost hiker. It still had a foot inside. I stumbled back, heart in my throat. The bone was white and clean, not fresh. The boot looked decades old, like it had been there since before I was born. I ran, didn't mark my path, didn't think, just ran until I hit my camp, grabbed the radio, and screamed for anyone to answer. The static finally broke. A voice crackled back. "Ranger, who is this? Repeat." I gave my name, location, and the find. Silence. Then another voice. This one wasn't from the radio. It came from just behind my tent. "You found it." I turned. No one was there. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept a fire going even though I was low on fuel. The trees felt too close, the shadows too deep. I kept thinking about that red mark on the tree, the boot, the voice. At 3:11 a.m., no joke, I checked my watch. I heard the voice again, closer this time, just one sentence. "You shouldn't have come back." Then the fire went out instantly, No wind, no rain, just gone. I grabbed my flashlight, turned it on, and the beam hit a figure just at the edge of the clearing, standing between the trees. They didn't move, didn't speak. I blinked, and they were gone. But where they stood, I saw a new red mark. This one wasn't on the tree. It was on the dirt, painted in a circle with a symbol I'd never seen. I broke camp at dawn, didn't finish my loop, didn't check the next station, just started hiking toward base. But the trail was gone. Every marker I'd set, every familiar tree, gone, replaced with red marks. Endless red marks. Every tree, every branch, every rock painted with red lines, arrows, and symbols. Like the forest had rewritten itself while I slept. I wasn't in high pines anymore. I was somewhere else. Somewhere that looked like the woods, but wasn't. The air was too still, the colors too flat, like a photo that had been drained of life. Then I saw the cabin, old, rotten, the roof sagging like a broken spine. Not on any of our maps, not on any of my patrols. I don't know what made me go in, maybe desperation, maybe stupidity, but the door was open, the floor creaked with every step, dust thick enough to choke on, and in the center on a table covered in scratches and old stains was a journal. I opened it, and every page was mine, my handwriting, my entries, things I hadn't written yet. Day 4, found the boot. Day 5, heard the voice. Day 6, cabin. The last page was dated tomorrow. It read, "He realizes the path never existed, that he was never a ranger, that he's been here before." Then beneath that, "Welcome back." I ran. Don't remember how far, but eventually I stumbled out of the forest into a gravel service road. A truck found me. I was dehydrated, disoriented. They airlifted me back, said I was missing for 12 days. I'd only packed food for 5. They asked where I went. I told them the truth. They didn't believe me. They never do. They said the Red Mark Trail doesn't exist. Said the High Pines region has been closed for years due to wildfires. Said no ranger had been assigned to that area since 2017. But my ID was valid, my logbook up to date. They couldn't explain that. No one could. That was 6 months ago. I quit, moved to the city, started writing about wilderness stories, park ranger stories, true creepy stories, told myself it was therapy, but that was a lie. I write because I have to, because the story isn't over, because sometimes when I check the metadata on my drafts, it says they were modified before I started typing, because sometimes when I close my laptop and walk into my hallway, I see red marks. And I remember the voice, "You shouldn't have come back." You're reading this now. Maybe you think it's just one of those scary horror stories from Reddit. Another, let's not meet tale someone cooked up for fun. But you scrolled too far, didn't you? You pictured the trees. You imagined the boot. You heard the voice. Which means the path can find you too. Because once you remember it, it becomes real. Because some stories aren't told. They're walked into, and now that you've seen the red mark, it knows where you are. They told me I had walked in circles for days, that the GPS on the Ranger truck kept glitching when they tried to track my last radio ping, that when they finally found me, I was kneeling in a clearing that didn't exist on any topographic map, talking to no one, scribbling into a notebook that had nothing written in it but the words, "The path finds you," over and over again. They chalked it up to trauma, exhaustion, a psychotic break triggered by isolation and dehydration. I wanted to believe them, I really did. But the problem is, I still had my logbook, the one I'd written in every day of that patrol. And the last entry was in someone else's handwriting. It was a name, not mine. Eric Dalton, a ranger who'd gone missing in the same area over 30 years ago. I didn't know the name at first. But when I searched it off record, I found something buried deep in the park archives. A scanned report from 1988. A ranger who vanished while clearing trails in high pines. His camp was found. Boots, pack, radio. But no body. His last journal entry trails gone red. Cabin still breathing. I'm too deep. Don't follow. No search party was ever launched. No press release ever made. The case was closed due to terrain risk. But now, I had his name in my book, and the next night, he left me a voicemail. It came from a blocked number. At 3:11 a.m., static at first, then a voice, breathy, rushed, fading in and out like it was coming from inside a wind tunnel. You opened it again, you brought it back. The trail never dies. It only remembers. Click, no callback option, no trace. I checked my call history. There was no record of the call, but I know what I heard. I recognized that voice because I'd heard it in the woods. I told myself to walk away, burn the journal, delete the files, live a normal life again. But then the emails started, anonymous, subject lines like, "They still wander." The cabin was never empty. Red marks found in Montana, Utah, Oregon. Each one had an attachment. Each one had photos. And in every single one, I saw something that made my stomach turn, a figure in the background. Sometimes standing, sometimes crouched. Once hanging from a tree by its arms, always far off, always blurry, but always watching. And in one of the photos, I swear it was wearing my uniform. The breaking point came when I got a package at my apartment. No name, just a postmark from Pine Ridge Trail Station, decommissioned inside a roll of film. A real 35mm roll wrapped in a wax paper envelope. No note, no explanation. I shouldn't have developed it, but I did. Every frame was of me, sleeping, reading, standing at my kitchen window, eating dinner, the timestamp all from tomorrow, and the final photo was black, except for a faint white outline of a red circle and just barely visible at the cabin. I knew I had to go back, not for answers, not to survive, but because something had followed me out of the woods, and if I didn't go to it, it was going to come for someone else. I packed light, told no one, used a burner phone, took a rental car to the edge of the park. No trail markers anymore, everything had been wiped clean, but I remembered the direction. I remembered the silence. I remembered the feeling, the way the air gets heavier, the way even your thoughts move slower. And when I stepped between the trees, the forest welcomed me. The trail was waiting. Red marks on the bark again, no GPS signal, no birds, no wind, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. And then I saw it again, the boot exactly where I left it, only now there were two, a matched pair, standing side by side, filled, not buried, and next to them, my own ranger badge, clean, polished, fresh. By the time I reached the cabin, the sun had vanished. Not set, just disappeared. The sky above was gray, featureless like a ceiling. The cabin door was open. Same smell, same journal on the table. Only this time it was blank and waiting. There was a pen beside it and a sentence written across the top of the page. "Write your ending or we'll write it for you." My hands moved before I could think. I wrote one line, "I am not the first." The pen moved again, but it wasn't me. It wrote, "But you might be the last." Then I heard the steps, not outside, above, the attic. There was no attic, but now there was. The ceiling had a hatch, a rope hanging down. The air thickened with every breath I climbed the ladder. Every rung groaned, every groan echoed too long, and when I reached the top, I didn't find darkness. I found a room lined with photographs, thousands of them, pinned to the walls, hung on strings, scattered across the floor, and every single one was me. Different clothes, different ages, different lives, but always in the woods, always near the cabin, always watching something I couldn't see. Until the final photo, it was taken from behind, and I was holding a notebook, writing, and behind me, the figure, smiling, wearing my face. Then the room began to shrink, walls folding, photos catching flame. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Just static, blinding, burning, then silence. I woke up in a hospital 2 states over, no ID, no memory according to the staff. They said I wandered into a fire station barefoot, muttering in a mix of English and something they didn't recognize. I asked for my name. They said, "You wrote it down, but you crossed it out right after." Said names don't matter in the redwoods. I checked myself out that night, didn't look back, but here's what you need to know. If you've read this far, if you've followed me through the trees, if you've imagined the cabin, then the trail knows you now. It finds the ones who believe just enough to keep reading, just enough to see. And when you close your eyes tonight, if you hear steps overhead, if you wake up with red marks on your mirror, don't run, don't scream. Just remember this. You were warned, you were given a chance. And the path was always there. I started seeing myself in places I hadn't been. Someone sent me a video, no subject line, no return address. It showed security camera footage from a ranger station 3 states away. Timestamp 2 days ago, 2:57 a.m. The figure in the video wore my old uniform, moved like me, stopped in front of the camera, stared into the lens, and whispered, "You took too long." Then it walked out of frame. I called the station. No one picked up. When I checked again, the footage was gone. 404, file not found, but the email remained in my inbox. Just one word in the subject line, now again. I tried staying in motels with no windows, tried living in crowds, tried forgetting the trees, but it didn't matter. Wherever I went, I saw red, in corner paint splatters, in kids' chalk drawings. Once on the side of a bus driving past me, a red arrow pointed back the way I came. I started to forget what day it was, started waking up with words written on my arms. One morning, you're close. Next morning, follow the sound. The next, this time, don't stop writing. I don't remember picking up the pen, but I'm writing again, longhand, in a journal that looks too familiar. Same cover, same size, same smell of mildew and ash. But this time, the pages are different. They don't stay written. Every time I turn back a page, the text has changed. Rewritten in someone else's voice. Names I don't recognize. Events that never happened to me. Deaths, lots of them. Rangers, campers, children, always the same trail. Always the same cabin, always ending with a single line, "He never came back." But I did. That's what makes me different. That's why the loop is unstable now. I wasn't supposed to survive. I wasn't supposed to keep writing. I was supposed to forget. But the cabin didn't take everything. Not yet. And the longer I remember, the more I change. The first time I noticed it was in the mirror. My face was mine, but too still, too smooth, like it was waiting to be worn again. And when I blinked, my reflection didn't. Then the dreams came back, worse than before. In one dream, I was the figure in the woods. I watched myself walk into the trees, watched myself find the boot, watched myself scream, and I smiled. Not because I was cruel, but because I remembered what comes next. Because that version of me wasn't real. Not yet, just memory becoming flesh. A draft forming, like a story waiting for the final sentence. I don't know if I'm still human, not fully. Some days I wake up and see the sky and think, this isn't how it used to look. like reality has shifted half a degree off true north, like the color of sunlight is wrong. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've slipped too far between pages. Maybe this is what happens when a story gets too close to the truth. It starts replacing the reader. So I went back. One last time, not to the cabin, but to where the trail begins. The trailhead no one marks. No map shows it. No ranger speaks of it. But the red mark was waiting for me, on the side of a stone just past the tree line, painted perfectly fresh, as if it had just been drawn. I followed it, deeper than ever before. No time, no sound, just memory, falling around me like snow. Moments I never lived, people I never met, but I knew them, somehow, and they knew me. Then I saw her, the figure, the first one, not a ghost, not a demon, just a story that walked too far into itself. She turned toward me, face flickering like an old projector, stuttering, eyes blank, but not empty, full of pages. She opened her mouth, and my own voice came out, "Are you ready to take my place?" That's how the story works. It doesn't end, it hands itself off, page to page, voice to voice, until the story is all that remains, until the person is paper, until someone else begins to read. So here's what you need to understand. You didn't find this story, it found you. You read too far. You imagined too much. You saw the boot, you heard the name, you remembered the cabin, which means it remembers you. And now there's only one question left. Who will read it after you? I thought I was done with the cabin, thought I'd broken free, but some doors don't close. They just swing shut quietly, waiting for you to return. The red mark on my wall was proof of that. It wasn't paint, it was a seal, a memory trying to reopen, and it had worked. I woke up in the woods again, not by choice. I went to bed in my apartment, double-locked doors, curtains drawn, all lights on. I closed my eyes and opened them under trees I recognized too well. Same dirt, same stillness, same trail, invisible but insistent, tugging at the corners of my memory. My boots were already laced, my pack already on my shoulders, and the path was waiting. I didn't walk it this time, it walked me. Every turn I thought I chose had already been made. Every tree I leaned on had already leaned back. Then I heard it again. That voice, my voice, speaking from somewhere ahead, calling my name, but not how I say it, like someone else had borrowed it, was trying it on, and it didn't quite fit. At the clearing where the cabin used to stand, there was nothing, just flattened grass, ash outlines where walls had been, and in the center, a chair, wooden, old, facing away. Someone sat in it. I stepped closer. The air rippled. It was me. He turned slowly. Same face, same jacket, same scar above the left brow, but his eyes were too calm, too still. He looked at me like I was something forgotten. Then he said, "You weren't supposed to make it out." I couldn't speak. He kept going. "You're the crack, the glitch. You made a choice no one else did. You finished the trail, but didn't stay." Then he stood, and everything around us darkened. The sky turned black, not night, just absence. The trees froze mid-sway. Time died. And in that void, he walked up and handed me something, a notebook, but not mine. I opened it. Inside, pages of my memories written out like a script. The night I first saw the airdrop, the red boot, the photo with my back turned, my screams in the attic. Each page ended with "but he wasn't the first." Then a final blank page, just one line written at the top. "This is where he trades places." I looked up. He wasn't there, just the notebook and the chair, and a single red mark drawn in a circle beneath my feet. Then I heard footsteps, dozens, surrounding me. Not leaves crunching paper, pages folding, crawling, closing in. I opened my mouth to scream, but the sound that came out wasn't mine. I woke up back in my apartment, but something was wrong. The air felt thinner, my vision too sharp. Everything moved half a second slower than it should. I rushed to the mirror, and the reflection blinked before I did, smiled before I did, and whispered, "We're back on track now. I'm not sure I'm still me, not all the way, but I'm still writing, still remembering, and now I know the final truth. You don't finish the trail to escape it. You finish it to become it, because the only way to stop the story from spreading has to take its place. It's been 3 days since I came back. At least, that's what the calendar says. But time feels thin now, unreliable, like I'm walking across cracked ice and every second could break through. I avoid mirrors. I don't answer my phone. I haven't touched the notebook since it reappeared on my kitchen table, because I know what's on the last page now. I don't need to read it. I wrote it, or someone wrote it as me. The voice still visits, not always out loud. Sometimes it's in flickers across the TV. Sometimes it hums through the pipes. Sometimes it's in my own voice, when I think too fast and don't realize I'm not the one narrating. But tonight it spoke clearly. It's time. The final red mark wasn't on a wall. It wasn't on a tree. It was on me, my palm. I woke up and it was there, burned in like a brand, pulsing gently with each heartbeat. And I knew what it meant. The path wasn't outside anymore. It never was. It's inside now, and it wants to be finished. So I opened the notebook, flipped to the last page, and saw the words waiting for me. The story ends when the next one begins. You write your final sentence. I hesitated. For the first time, I thought about resisting. I thought about staying silent. But then I looked to the window, and outside, in the reflection of the glass, I saw the cabin, standing across the street where the gas station used to be, lit from within, waiting. I wrote my sentence. Not because I wanted to, but because I understood now. The story isn't cursed. It's hungry. It doesn't want to be scary. It wants to be remembered. And the only way to survive it is to give it someone else. So here's my final line. And then the next reader opened the page. And now that reader is you. They'll find this notebook eventually. Maybe in an abandoned ranger cabin, maybe on a trail that's not on the map. Maybe inside a drawer in a house no one remembers building. They'll open it, and they'll read what I'm writing now, word for word, because this story always ends the same way. Someone reads it, someone follows it, and someone replaces the last one who did. I'm not afraid anymore. Because fear is for people who think they still have a choice. I gave mine away the moment I read too far, the moment I saw my death from behind, the moment I walked the path back to the cabin. And now I understand I'm not the victim. I'm not the witness. I'm not even the author. I'm the bait. So if you've read this far, if you pictured the trees, felt the silence, heard that voice in the attic of your own mind, then congratulations, you've stepped onto the trail. And somewhere out there, in your mirror, in your hallway, in your camera roll, a red mark is already waiting. You won't see it yet. But when you do, it means the story has chosen you. And when someone asks what happened to the person who wrote this, tell them the truth. He never came back. The end.